Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Teri Hunter. I'm an intuitive astrologer, and I'm here today to talk about the full moon in Gemini happening on Monday, November 27th, 2023 at 1:16 a.m. Pacific time. If you are in any other time zone, please adjust for your location. What I'm going to do here today is go through some of the aspects and show you on the chart. This is the actual chart of the full moon, and some of the things I think are most interesting about what's going on in the skies right now. So a full moon is when the sun and the moon are in opposition. It is the brightest phase of the moon where things are, there's a clarity, there's a culmination, something is revealed and is brought to the surface. At this full moon, we see the moon at 4 degrees of Gemini, and then the sun at 4 degrees Sagittarius is conjunct Mars. The sun and Mars have been traveling together for a couple of weeks now as they went through Scorpio, which can make for some rather challenging aspects when Mars is in its lower energies. But at the same time, Mars is what I think of as the general to the king. And so when they're traveling together in balance, they have an opportunity to have a great effect on themselves, on those around them. And I don't mean to do it purposefully. It's a standing in leadership type of thing. So what I think is going on with this particular full moon in Gemini is that Gemini rules information. It rules our emails, our everyday conversations, what we think, what we speak, how we interact with our workmates, our teammates, our classmates, our siblings, how we drive on the roads, how we even walk on the roads. There are so many, every part of our life is touched by the Gemini energy. So I think what's going on here for this particular full moon is something is coming to light in how I want to be brave and how I want to take action and how I want to spend my everyday life. The ruler of this full moon is Mercury, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But first, before we do, I want to talk about how the sun and Mars are squaring Saturn. Saturn is in Pisces. In this particular chart, at the time of the full moon, it happens to be in the 6th house of work. Mercury naturally rules the 6th house, and as I said earlier, rules our everyday activities, including our work life. So what I think here is that this full moon is bringing about illuminations about how you want to spend your life. What do I want to do? What chapters are you coming up to? Saturn is now making its second visit to this 0 degrees of Pisces. This is where I'm really willing to look at where there's been a fog or where there's been confusion or maybe even a bit of deception about your potentials to move your story forward or to expand or to blossom. We see the sun and Mars both in the sign of expansion, and that's naturally ruled by Jupiter. And I say this because this Jupiter is in a quincunx to the sun and Mars. So I believe that there's going to be something that comes up that reveals something in the workplace, something about if you're an influencer, moving your story forward, or where potentially you have held yourself back, or there's been influences that have been sitting underneath your history. That's the way I want to put it. Saturn rules history, and it could be, something from your childhood that you didn't realize was an underlying fear, trepidation, concern that has prevented you from moving your story forward. And now brave action is being called forth. The other thing about this quincunx is that there is a natural not seeing eye to eye. So when we see Jupiter retrograde in Taurus, another sign that rules history, this makes me feel as if there's the potential that a very deep-seated imprint comes to life that makes you aware of something that almost is like an epiphany or pops something open. And I think the important thing at that time is not to judge yourself for not knowing this piece of information sooner, or not having this revelation sooner. Because what we're looking at here is we also have the Mercury, the ruler of this full moon, is near the galactic center. Right now, you can see here it's at 24 degrees of Sagittarius. The galactic center is at 27 degrees of Sagittarius. It's a 3 to 5 degree orb. And this is a really good time during this full moon to access information from the divine. The galactic center is an opportunity when Mercury goes over that spot, or Jupiter, or really any planet, but Mercury ruling our communications is an ability to connect with our divine inner being, to access the quantum fields, and to download, for lack of a better term, divine solutions. I think they're inspirations. So here we see Mercury at the, these last degrees of Sagittarius. And yes, it is squaring Neptune. And I think this plays back to the full moon squaring Saturn, the Sun and Mars squaring Saturn in the first degrees of Neptune. So some sort of confusion, fog, trepidation, even addiction to fear, addiction to being defeated, addiction to being a victim could come into play and actually be popped, because, and I mean that in a good way, popped as if, I've turned this into a resource now, because Mercury is making a trine, exact trine, to the North Node in Eris. And Eris is the little sister of Mars. Mars just here having a conversation with the Sun and with Saturn. And so here Eris is like, she fights for the underdog. I like to call her Xena warrior princess. I feel like she is a little, sometimes may appear to be unethical, but she always has the best intentions. And now she really wants to connect with, expressing her individuality, being brave in that. The Mars rules Aries. Now we have this North Node. We're stretching for that individuality. And this trine is supporting new thoughts about that and new ideas to be implemented in our everyday life. We also see Mercury making a sextile to Venus in Libra, where she is the lord of the house, lordess of the house. And we see this exact trine to the South Node. So there is something about your conversation. There's something about being able to be diplomatic, to be able to be harmonious and peaceful as you open up to bigger opportunities to actually make money through your own creative endeavors. And I say this because the South Node is been hovering around the fixed star Spica. Spica is, I love to say it, the voice of angels. It is where we experienced the solar eclipse on October 14th in Libra. It was at 21 degrees and conjunct Spica. And we see almost a similar, even though it's Venus, but Venus rules our self-worth. She rules our voice, our ability to speak in a way that supports our dreams or tanks them. So here, Spica is known as the gift of knowledge, and it's in the constellation of Virgo. So this all plays back to the idea that we have a full moon in Gemini, the full moon bringing in some sort of realization, culmination, illumination, being able to see something in a way that I hadn't seen it before. And yet I'm not criticizing myself for not seeing it before. I realize that this is the perfect time for me to have this illumination, and the perfect time for me to address the square that Mercury is having, not only, Mercury is having with Neptune, but also how the Sun is having it with Saturn, Sun and Mars. Is a perfect time to address those things, because as we look at this, Spica it has the nature of Mercury and Venus together. And then we see Mercury on the galactic center in a harmonious conversation with Venus. this couldn't be a better time to meditate, to really take some time. And when I say meditate, I don't necessarily mean having to quiet your mind, but just to be present, to be walking through your day with an awareness that you're having a communication with your inner being. And that communication could offer you information that is pivotal to moving your story forward. Spica, for those who have planets around Spica, which is 23 degrees of Libra, are known to be educated and knowledgeable. They're very philosophical, eloquent, creative, artistic, clever, witty. They enjoy the pleasures of life. They are very charismatic. On the flip side, the challenging side, we see that they can be a little self-centered, sometimes slightly promiscuous and fickle. But for the most part, right now, what I think is that this combination could illuminate where you've been fickle or where you've been indecisive about how you wanted to move your story forward. Gemini is the twins, going back and forth, considering different things, getting short bits of information in order and spreading that information. And every once in a while, it doesn't hurt to get a deeper level of information before drawing a conclusion. I also was doing some research about the 4th degree, where this full moon is. And the full moon is at a critical degree for the mutable signs. And so we're seeing here that if you have any planets around 4 degrees of Gemini or Sagittarius, this is going to be a very impactful full moon for you. And I say that because the critical degrees add an intensity. They require a focus. It's the soul is addressing something that it wants to evolve through and have an awareness about so that it can feel empowered. And at the same time, that empowerment is usually brought about through extra challenges. And here what we're going to see is extra challenges to decide if the old rules, Saturn, work for me the way I think they do, or if in some ways they are limiting me from truly expressing the fullness of who I am. This is a blind spot, and this is a spot where Jupiter is not being seen for expansive. It could actually, on some level, be seen as the dark side of Jupiter, where it's boastful or entitled or, thinks too much of itself. And that might be the fear. I don't want people to think I'm full of myself. But if you don't think you're good at something, how will you achieve it? So I think this is a really intense, on some level, full moon, because I think it's going to really confront how we think, how we default when we are in indecision or when we don't have a clear path forward, how we default to a more defeated potential path. We don't see that a pause can offer an illumination, or a pause can allow the divine to bring in a resource that we otherwise would not have known about. So I think that's one of the key components to this full moon, is having an awareness of the way I'm thinking, allowing for my expansion without having to necessarily see my expansion materialize just yet. Again, there's that square to Saturn with the sun, and it's also to the moon. If I come up here and click here, you'll see it there to the moon as well. Pardon me. And then we see the 1.5 to Venus. And this is really very far out of bounds. So I'm not necessarily addressing this when it comes to the moon, but this is, here's your emotions sort of asking, am I good enough? Am I bright enough? Am I clever enough? Am I witty enough? And the answer is probably yes. And yet here you're being tasked with digging deep into who is your audience. Because if we look at the people that we revere, that have influence over us, or that we look at as stars or movie stars, most often what we see is a true commitment to being their authentic self. And that's what we fall in love with. So I think that's something to consider. I think the end of 2023 is a lot about sort of revisiting or inventorying where we have fine-tuned our thought process, where we've looked at our belief system and found that there's certain areas that we could tone and muscle up a little bit. And at the same time, rather than judging ourselves for not having achieved those things, realizing that it's a process, that life is a process and illuminations are layered. They don't just come all at once. So that's what I have to say for this full moon in Gemini. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving. If you're here in the United States, I will be doing my live show on YouTube on Sunday morning at 11 a.m. I hope you'll join me. That's where we'll look at the week ahead transits, and we will get angels' advice for traversing those transits. So thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful, again, a wonderful holiday, and I will see you on Sunday. Bye-bye.